All right, excellent. So this presentation is in Mentimeter, so you can make comments, you can signal questions, and it's going to be throughout the presentation. So if you would please go ahead and go into menti.com and enter that code you're seeing. Let me also get in chat for you. Sorry, my keyboard is acting up. 45, 56, 37, and 8. All right, I got one in there. I see a thumbs up. So give me a thumbs up if you're in, or question mark if you're coming in with questions. And there's a new comments feature in Mentimeter. All right, I see 6, 7. All right, very good. Looks like we've got the majority. So let's go. All right, a little bit of background, although Taryn gave such a gracious introduction. I'm still gushing at that, thank you. So you might be able to see the gray hairs and the mustache. I have been at this for a while. I actually started my professional work in 1990. In 92, started working in VR. So my background in distributed teams goes back that far, because this was virtual reality over a distance. 2004 was when I first started working with distributed Agile teams. It was around 2000 with co-located. I always tried to get co-located. For some reason, I rarely got them. I had to end up with the distributed folks. And as an Agilist, I always thought, if the idea is to inspect and adapt, well, maybe we can do this. So without reading through all of this, I have worked with different types of distributed teams in different environments, and that's most of the professional work here on the left-hand side, but also I've done quite a bit of work in the Agile community, and that's represented on the right-hand side. And again, all distributed teams to plan events, to plan communities and how to build them. These days, I have my own independent consultancy, K5 Labs. And as Taryn mentioned, I have a book out called From Chaos to Successfully Distributed Teams, which talks about my years of experience, as well as Johanna Rothman's. I co-authored with Johanna, wonderful experience. And we wrote it as a distributed paired team. So we did not go back and forth on that. We actually got on a call like this every day. It would write for 30 to 60 minutes a day to produce the book. So we practiced what we talked about in the book. But I want to figure out, who are some of you? So let me know what your role is. So go into Menti and let me know, are you a delivery team member? That could be developer, QA, user experience, but you're helping put code out into the world. Maybe you're a scrum master or a coach, a product owner or product manager. Pick your choice there of terms. Leadership could be manager on up to director or executive. Maybe there's an other role that I'm not quite catching here. All right, cool. So for those who have that other role, I'm curious, what is that other role that you have? If you put that in chat, please. Oh, we have a few others. Yeah. Can you share that in chat? Project manager. Okay. Thank you. All right. Let us press on from here. So my other question, because I'm really curious about this. Oh, okay. Customer success manager. Thank you. I'm watching both chats there. So when did you prepare to go remote in 2020? Were you on a remote team before this year? Did you prep in the January, February timeframe as your company started wondering what was happening with the pandemic? Did you prep in early March, or did you kind of get kicked out the door? Okay, I see a few people that quickly voted, yeah, we just got shoved out. All right, some did prep early and some were already on remote teams. And some in March. Okay. Oh, that's pretty even distribution. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit for each of you then. Wonderful. Thank you for that. So maybe you've seen some articles like these over the last few weeks. No, does your company have a long-term plan for remote work? Sure, give it a thumbs up there. Distributed Scrum, you've seen a few articles on that, but even bigger impacts on what's going to happen with the suburbs versus the inner city, and how is that going to change the dynamics of many different things. The real question is the world broken, or is it ready to be remade? That was a question that I was kind of wrestling with over the last few weeks. So with this picture here, I want you to take a look at it for just a second and let me know, is this something broken that needs to be fixed? Is it something that just needs to be thrown away? Or is it something new, or none of the above? Okay. There's several that probably recognize what that is. Okay, something to fix. All right. Wait for a few other votes here. 13, 14. Okay. Good. Okay. So I think the majority of you recognize what that is a picture of. So this is an art form known as kintsugi. So it's a Japanese art form where if you have any kind of broken pottery, the artists in Japan looked at how could we make this into a piece of art by resealing it with gold or silver or other kind of lacquer, and there's really can be some beautiful pieces made this way. So while it looks like something broken that needs to be fixed, the Japanese have taken this broken thing and made it into something very new. So I want you to think about this idea of kintsugi as we talk about our three perspectives that will help you think about your next workplace. We're going to talk about resilience. We're going to talk about inclusivity. And we're going to talk about generativity as part of this. Okay, so let's talk about resilience. So I'm sure it's been an exciting time for everybody these last few weeks. And some of the excitement even leads to stress. So there are companies that have been doing remote far before the pandemic. You see some of the names up here. And if you are one of those that started looking for anything about remote teams and just struggling to make this work, and I noticed there were a lot of people voting that you kind of got shoved out the door, you might have been in this position. And you realize these people were saying, oh yeah, asynchronous communication is the way to go. My question was, when I saw things like this, is does this mean we're all going to be in silos? Are we all going to be isolated? I am a confirmed introvert, and so I need my time to recharge, but I do also like people. So I'm glad some of you have your video on. That's where I'm looking down. That's where your pictures are. So I can see, okay, good. There's still people here in the presentation. And feel free to please to add any comments or questions in chat as well, because that way I know there's people still here. I'm not talking into the void. But as people see these more experienced remote companies and they see this push for asynchronous communication, they wonder, is this really what the future's like? Are we all going to sit by ourselves in our homes? Also, you might have caught this tweet thread from a few days ago. So this was back August 16th. And I don't know how many of you follow John Cutler. If you do, give me hit the heart to let me know. John does some just brilliant guy. Mostly talks on product management, but I would just say if you're on Twitter, just follow him. You'll love what he shares out there. But he shared this tweet thread talking about uh, self-care and health during the pandemic, and it's a long thread, but these things really stood out for me. Is if you feel isolated, you tend to work more because you don't have the same feedback loops you would have in the office. You don't you don't necessarily know when it's time to stop working. You don't know when it's time to start working. So you're at work and at home all the time. So you might just start and keep working longer hours. I know I have during the pandemic. Uh, and you've got to be very careful. Yeah. and and burnout is one of the big dangers here. So if you're not practicing some sort of, say, meditation or just regular exercise to get some feedback on how your body's doing, you can experience burnout and not even realize it. And I think one of the best points he made is you need to talk to somebody about it in the open. Now that might be scary for some of you, and I get that. But even when we're remote, we need that connection with each other. So in our book, some of the things that we talked about to help build resistance is creating a rhythm around your activities. So as Agilists, you probably do a regular planning cadence. You probably do retrospectives. You might be doing either daily stand-ups or some modified form where you're syncing up on, are we meeting the goal? Does anybody need help moving forward? So that rhythm helps us, and doing that collaboratively also helps distributed teams. So where a lot of my success has been is going to work with a team that's already distributed and applying those agile principles and practices and realizing this rhythm and focusing more on collaborative work and not just asynchronous work is what has really helped these teams be successful. Now, as part of that, it's not just collaborate all the time, because what I'll call them the asynchronous uh, folks are saying is you need time for deep focus. And you probably hear this, if I know we had some developers and some other folks, you need that time for deep focus. If you're a product manager, you need that time for focus. We need that quiet time, and we don't need Slack buzzing at us. We don't need email buzzing at us. So in order to do that, we need to build and maintain a holistic culture. And so with that, one of the things that Johanna and I talked about as we were writing the book is, where are we seeing the really successful teams? Well, they don't just communicate about work, but they also communicate about personal life. So if you came on early, you heard us talking about holidays, and Bevan is getting ready to move. He's got a new house coming up. He's not excited about the 2 mortgages, but that's kind of the situation. So it's super important to share some of that personal context. So yes, I have this cool green screen and it looks like I'm in the TARDIS right now, but when I'm working with a team, I show them the ugly, messy office. And so I let them see the mess. I let them see Perry the Platypus and Mickey Mouse up there, and that's okay. And and some of you who were here early, you saw my red warning light on the door. So my kids know that if they come in, the red light's on, they get introduced, not that they get shooed away. We all bring part of our workspace with us now in this remote space. So share what you can, because that helps when you have a sick child or a sick spouse or a sick family member, or you need to go take care of something, and your teammates need to know that, so they know where to fill in, where to help out, where to maybe take on something that maybe you couldn't get finished before something like this happened. It's also equally important to communicate about, where do you want to grow, even now. So for those of you who kind of got forced to be rapidly a remote, hit the heart button if you had to rely on your colleagues to quickly figure out all the tools that you had to use suddenly that you never used before. Okay, I'm seeing a few hitting the heart button now. Yep, yeah. So we all had to quickly figure out how do I use Slack if I'd never used it before, or how do I use Zoom, or how do I figure out what the latest changes in Zoom are, because it's changing every week. We had that conversation here as we were prepping. So also, as you maybe you decide to continue as a remote team, so how do you get better at facilitating your remote team? Maybe you want to switch around who facilitates each time, and it doesn't have to be the coach or the scrum master. Well, how can we get better at that? And how do you look for opportunities? You've got to share that with the team. You've got to share that with those who can help you. So sharing just the right amount of the personal context, the growth context, and of course the work context is where we've seen the most successful distributed teams. And there's research to back this up. So give me a thumbs up if you've heard of Karen Sobel-Lejeski, Dr. Lejeski, I should say. All right, nobody has. Highly recommend you take a look at her work. So she was looking at the concept of virtual distance. So her concern was, as people were dealing with more and more devices, and it doesn't matter whether they were co-located or not, how separated were they feeling with each other? So this could be distributed teams. It could be people in office that were just heads down with their headphones on and not paying attention to each other. How much distance do they feel? Hey, Clive, how you doing, man? So she did years of studies across different industries. She's got several books. I'll say the latest one is probably the best one. The first ones were more from her PhD studies, and if you've read Don Reinersten's work, then you might have the same interesting experience reading some of her early books. I will say her latest book is a little more digestible. So, but some of the things that she found were, yes, it is Dr. Lejeski, yeah, and she found out that physical distance is actually the least impactful. There's an impact, but it's the least impactful. Yep, that's the one. Thanks, Bevan. Operational distance is what's the connection or what's the relationships in the organization. And there are some short-term things that can be done there. But really what makes the difference is the connection that people have, the affinity distance. That has the greatest impact. So if you've been on those remote teams and you've been that odd person out, you know what it's like to feel very distant. And so there's more strategic, long-lasting things that need to be done. So really, it's about balance. And it's balancing different things, balancing the deep work, balancing everyone's need to connect with people. And as I mentioned, as an introvert, I still want to connect with people. I don't want to avoid them totally. And I'm sure some of you have the same feeling. It's also, what is it we need to accomplish? And that's what you're seeing here along the bottom. So do we need more opportunities to brainstorm or ideate? Do we need more opportunities to make sure we're aligned on our goals and make sure we're kind of going the same direction? Do we need opportunities to co-create, pairing, swarming? Do we need opportunities to review each other's work and make sure what we're putting out has quality to it? Do we need to make sure we're building the right thing? Do we have that interaction with stakeholders? So go into Menti and let me know for your teams right now, which of these do you feel they need or you need? So menti.com, because I know some of you came in late. So go ahead and vote on where you might need more. All right, see a lot around stakeholders, a lot around alignment. That could be also within the team, not just with stakeholders. All right, seeing some shifts now. Okay. We're starting to push toward the boundaries now. Okay. So right now, what I'm seeing is, in a way, we need more of everything. That's what we're feeling. We need more opportunities to interact, but we also need more of that deep focus, which is interesting because we're all remote. This is like your optimal chance to get that deep focus. However, because you didn't have choice, we're all scrambling to figure out, are we on the right track? Are we building the right thing? Who's doing what? And so there's probably many different ways that you get interrupted. So if you go into studies on deep work, you'll see that choice is what's key. Now, if you dig into, and I'll share out the site on the asynchronous information. If you dig into some of those articles, those folks are not saying let's be asynchronous all the time. They're saying on things that require deep work, the interruptions are what are the most costly. It's another form of multitasking, any kind of interruption. And I'm sure several of you have seen those studies where for some of us, on average, it can take 23 minutes for us to recover that deep focus. So if you're getting pinged in Slack all the time, as you probably are now, or Microsoft Teams, your weapon of choice there, it's hard to have that deep focus. It's hard to make sure these things on the bottom are happening. But also these things on the bottom, these could be done asynchronously or synchronously. So you might want to do a little survey with your teams and say, based on how we need things here on the bottom, what do we need to adjust on the top? For which of these activities do we need more deep focus? Or for which of these activities do we need more collaboration, more connection? And do we have enough choice that we can make adjustments? In some places still, even though some organizations I've visited claim they're agile, I find there's not a lot of choice in how they implement their process and how they implement these items on the bottom. So that choice is one of the key adjustment factors actually to make the rest of this successful. All right, so let's talk about inclusive. Oh yeah, thank you, Angie. Thanks for the book reference. Okay, so I'm sure many of you have heard this. What is diversity? What is inclusion? But even for those of us who are remote, in the past, maybe we've worked with a co-located group and we were a remote person, this applies just as well. Can you make everyone feel accepted and comfortable, ready to share their opinions and thoughts without hesitation? I prefer this quote as a better way of thinking about diversity versus inclusion. Diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And that's Verna Myers. And you may have heard some variations on that. So it's not only are women equally invited to dance, are people of different races invited to dance, but are we also balancing the remote and the non-remote before all of this happened? Because we're now all experiencing what it means to be remote. And we're about to see a shift in a very interesting way here soon. So let me talk about that. So in the book, we talk about many different team types, but these are the three key ones. So you might have your satellite teams, and this is where the majority of people were in one location and you had one person or maybe a few people each in their own home or remote. So sort of like a satellite orbiting the main team. You might have clusters, groups of people in different locations. And you might have nebulas. So these were pretty rare until about, I would say 7, 8 years ago. That's when a lot of those companies like Zapier and others started popping up. But it's teams where everyone was fully dispersed. Well, guess what? You're all in a nebula team right now. Everybody's dispersed. Nobody is co-located. So you're actually in the most successful team type, but not under the best conditions. You didn't choose to do this, or at least those who were shoved out the door. I know there were several that said they were remote before January. So this is where many of us are now. We're starting to open up things. We're starting to think about how do we go back in the office, or how do we rotate who's in the office. So some might be home, some might be at work, and we might rotate this every day in some cases. So I'm curious, before March of this year, which distributed team types have you seen? Have you seen the solo remote cases, clusters or groups remote, everyone remote, some sort of hybrid, or you were always co-located? So if you'd go back into Menti and let me know. All right. Many hybrid situations, a couple in the all remote situation. All right. Some clusters. Yeah. And 2 of you probably never chose to be distributed this way. I'm sorry for that. I know this has not been pleasant for you these last few months. I will say for me, can't vote for multiple options. Yeah. Yeah, that's a possibility as well. Thank you, Stuart. I appreciate you mentioning that. So you might have seen even a mix of these, depending on different industries you've been in, different companies you've been in. For those of us who've been in the Nebula teams, the all remote, all dispersed teams, it hasn't been a huge shift, but it has been a shift, because sometimes some of us in the Nebula teams, we have our space at home, but sometimes we like to go somewhere else. We like to have a change of scenery, or maybe go to a co-working space and meet with friends and still have lunch with old coworkers or friends that we know. And that's not been possible. So even those of us who've been very distributed have been challenged by this. So in our book, we talk about ways to be a more inclusive for those who are remote is to not focus so much on time zones, but the hours of overlap. How many hours of overlap do you have in your day so collaboration's possible? And then what kind of transparency do you have, and what kind of pervasive communication? So on those last two, it's really about how open are you in the communication, and how much do you amplify things? There was a blog post I wrote a couple of weeks back called Remote Amplifies. So being remote amplifies the distance, but it also amplifies that need to make sure you're communicating clearly. So if you've been recruiting during this time and you might be remote for a while, I hope that you're focusing on clear communication skills, both written and verbal, because you're using a lot of both right now. So writing clearly is just as important as speaking clearly in a remote team. But on the hours of overlap, here's just a brief example of a team spread across Raleigh, North Carolina, Boston. So these are both East Coast of the US, a person in London and a person in Berlin. They all come in at their preferred times. They take lunch at their preferred times. They leave at their preferred times. And with all of that choice, there's only 2 hours in their day they have the whole team completely overlapped. So putting a chart together like this for your team might help the team understand, maybe we need to make some adjustments so it's a little easier to collaborate. Maybe we need to do a little something different around our meetings so it's easier for us to collaborate. So I had one remote team that actually combined stand-ups and retrospectives as part of their kind of rethinking their process. They ran as a Kanban team. They had to they had to deal with many different changes. And so they found out that dealing with the small changes as part of a stand-up and doing very quick retrospectives once a week helped them get through a lot of the small issues, and the large issues would be queued up for the retrospective. So it was almost a pull-based retrospective. When they had 2 or 3 big issues, that's when they would run it, or until they got about a month out. So they would just wait until they accumulated any issue that took them more than 5 minutes to talk through, and that was their cue to say, okay, now we're ready to schedule the big retro. So having that choice is important for the team, and especially being a remote team that doesn't have 100% overlap. Also, as we go back into offices in some way, shape, or form, we're going to see more of the hybrid teams. And guess which ones those are? Those are the satellites and the clusters. So those of you who have experienced those are the ones that cause us the most trouble. Those are the ones that are most challenging because we're mixing communication modes. We're mixing all kinds of things. And it's not inclusive. It's not a level communication or planning. And so as we try to figure out what do we do as we get through this pandemic, how do we work together in office and out, watch for these situations. I think we're going to see far more hybrid remote teams than we ever have in the past. Some have already decided. You've heard Google, Facebook, and others said, you know, let's just go for a year. We're all going to work dispersed. It's going to be easier. And other companies have just said, we're just staying dispersed. We now know how that's going to work for us. It's not that big of a shift for us. All right, let's talk about generative. So it's an odd term, but essentially it means a concern for establishing and guiding the next generation. For us, it was about how do you create that continuous improvement throughout the whole team where anyone can run an experiment at any time. And when there's any kind of communication, asynchronous or synchronous, always assume good intention or try to set that tone. So if you've studied things like crucial conversations or clean feedback, all those objective frameworks where it gets you stepping back and saying, okay, here is what I'm hearing, here's the story I'm telling myself, but maybe there's other views. Asking that question of yourself, maybe there's other views I should consider, that is even more important. So it's not just the coaches and the scrum masters that need to do this, it's really everyone in the remote environment. And also, I know when you go to conferences, you come across this idea of a code of conduct. That's very, in a way, it's reactive. Think about what's a code of growth or a code of learning that maybe you can instill in your organization, even now as a remote team. How can we better reach out to each other and help each other grow? Remember, growth was one of those circles we had in the holistic culture. So how can we as a team, as an organization, really help each other not only get through this, but grow through this? So in other words, how can we be kintsugi? How can we take those pieces? How can we make something better and different than it was before? So think about how, as you're moving ahead or moving back into your office, however that is, think about that idea of kintsugi. How do you take the pieces and make something even better than you had before? All right, I'm going to open it up to questions since I didn't see too many there in chat. What questions do you have?
And Mark, I do.
Okay.
Um, and it's not so agile related, but just generally around distributed and remote working. How do you cater? What's the best way to cater for? And I take this from personal experience. I'm an extrovert. I like being around people. I like being in an office. And obviously, not everyone's like that. What is the most effective way to cater for different personalities in a team if you are working remotely or distributed? Are there any sort of additional skills or techniques or tools that could be used?
Yes, certainly. So, and this is not just for the extroverts, but really for everyone. Another thing, another tool in the toolkit that you'll see mentioned, especially with those promoting asynchronous, is when you do meet synchronously, make it count. And the best tool is the one-on-one. We usually associate that with an individual and their manager, but why not set up just regular coffee sessions? Why not just set up a regular one-to-one between peers just to touch base? So in the last organization where I worked, which was a Nebula organization, we were completely distributed. We started doing random one-on-ones. There's apps you can use for Slack and other things like Donut, which will do this for you randomly. We did this more manually, but it's letting people connect one-to-one. Another thing you can do is many talk about the water cooler channel in chat where anybody can post anything. Well, why not give people choice and allow them to post different ideas, different themes? So what I've seen one of my clients do is they started allowing anybody to set up a special interest group channel. So there was one on motorcycles. There was one on do-it-yourself home repairs. Bevan might be interested in that one, by the way. There might be actually there was one on board games and of course video games. They stayed out of each other's channels. They didn't get in that fight. But what was interesting about this is they found business value in these special interest groups because as people kind of gathered for their interest and connected with each other, their remote colleagues this way, some of these things grew into more communities of practice around certain things like certain programming languages. But if nothing else, as people started moving around to new opportunities within the organization, they found they already knew each other through these special interest groups. So they've already made connections. They'd say, oh, hey, Taryn, I know her. She'd be awesome on this team. Let's pull her in because maybe you were in the pet channel with somebody and they got to know you that way. So just finding those ways for people to connect as people is what you really need to build as a remote team. Other questions?
Thank you. There is a question in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, Shoban? Okay. How do you respond to an organization that's undergoing change, restructuring, new operating model, while still adopting agile ways of working? I hope they're not doing it during the pandemic. That's my first. That's a little too much change at one time. Um, there's a separate talk I give on change, but some of you might be familiar with the Satir change model. And the idea is we wrestle with the assumptions that change is challenging, and we kind of go down in productivity as we're wrestling with this, and then we finally let go of those assumptions and start trying new things and find new ways to be productive again. If you're dealing with multiple changes, that can be difficult. So that's why I was saying, hopefully they're not doing it now. But it does happen. So the thing I would say is, how can you use what you know about Agile principles to navigate that change? So if the idea is to inspect and adapt, if you're restructuring, if you're using a new organizational model, okay, so that new organizational model might have some different metrics. What is that? What does that mean for you as an Agilist? Does that change the? Does it reflect a change in goals? How does that impact what happens in your product backlogs, for instance? How does that align all the way up through the organization? Those are the questions you should be asking as an Agilist. How does this change not only impact me and my team, but how are we connecting this change throughout the organization, so I make sure that my team and I are moving along with the change, that we're navigating that change. Hopefully they help, Siobhan. Oh, you ask those questions tomorrow. Great. Okay. All right.
So Mark, I've actually got a question. It's based on an article that you shared probably about a week or 2 weeks ago. It was like a graphic that was done by the BBC about what the future of work could look like, and it tells a story about someone in, I think it was, in 5 years' time or something, and about how the world's changed. How do you think our normal way of working is going to look? Or what is it going to look like in 5 years' time, in your opinion?
That's a tough one to answer right now, because we don't know how long it's. We're fairly certain there's a vaccine on the way. We're moving very quickly on that, but we don't know how effective it'll be, and it's going to take a while. Meanwhile, people have to live, people have to work. So that view from the BBC, and I didn't have it handy, maybe somebody else can put it in chat there, but they were basically showing a person who was shifting her times to make sure that not everyone was arriving at their building at the same time. Speaking to the elevator, so it was a touchless experience on the elevator. And so there was all these different changes in the design of the building. I think we're going to actually see more companies consider going fully remote, because that kind of infrastructure change is expensive if you're a small or medium business. If you're a multinational, you're going to spend tons of money to get a building refurbished that way. And that's going to be difficult. But I also think there's going to be, because many people did not have a choice in going remote in March, and many were shoved out, I think there's going to be a very deep divide. I think some are going to be very anti-remote because they found this a horrible experience. And there's going to be some that are say, this is not so bad. I think I'd like to work this way. I think if I remember correctly, at least here in the US, we went from, I have to look at the stats again. I think we went from less than 15% working remotely on a daily basis to now about 30 to 35% considering working remotely on a daily basis. So experience has changed everyone's thinking about what work is, what work looks like. But how that change is going to manifest, it's going to take some time. So the BBC vision is one possibility, but that's an expensive possibility. I think we're going to still be fumbling around for a while, at least a year or so. Any other questions?
Another one from me. What is your view on camera on, camera off in virtual meetings? And how do you navigate that, Lee? How do you navigate that professionally if you're trying to have a conversation with a client and you prefer the camera on? Are there any ways to deal with that are best?
So again, the best thing you can do for a remote team is provide as much choice as possible. And that includes camera on, camera off. And yes, you're going to get the best communication experience with the whole team if the camera is on. You will see some body language, you will see some facial expressions, you'll see some people do goofy things in the camera even. But also keep in mind, we all have different home and work life before the pandemic. And there are some that have not had awesome home situations. Um, and they have wrestled with not revealing that, the best way I can put it. And because of that, going to work, going away to work was a relief for them. And so now they have that difficult situation. They're working in that difficult situation, working remotely. So having the camera on and having the microphone open may not be awesome for them. There might be some things they don't want their colleagues to see. So I never force anyone to use a camera. I invite them, but there's always a way to connect. For those of you who are Scrum Masters and coaches, I am sure at some point in your training, you have been through some sort of listening skill activity. You know, turn that up to 11, as they say. They really get good at listening for change in tone, listening for stress, and listening for silence. So when I'm facilitating with any kind of team, and I've got the main screen here, but I got chat off to the side, and if I notice that somebody's not saying a bunch, and sometimes if it's a big meeting, I'll have my list on the side and I'll kind of check everyone's names and say, okay, how often am I hearing different people? Am I hearing some people dominate? Am I not hearing somebody at all? I'll DM some of those people and say, do you need some help kind of breaking in on the conversation? There might be something happening and they might be sick, who knows? And they might say, no, I'm good for now. If I see a pattern of that, I might have a one-on-one with them, say, hey, is everything okay? Do you need assistance? And I've learned, actually, I think I learned that last line from Angie, is the better way to address it is, do you need assistance? So just checking in on those you're not hearing from. And you don't have to be a coach or scrum master. If you're a teammate and you're noticing somebody's being very quiet, check in on them. We're humans, we can do that. All right.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right.
So
Yeah, and questions about, yeah. I'm sorry, I was just reading JF's comment about psychological safety as well. Yeah. I'm sorry, go ahead, Clive.
So quick one. So how do you encourage also then people to create environments within their home space where this is where you work, and when you leave that space, this is where you relax? And because what you also find is people sit in one place where they may watch TV, but then they're also working in that same space, and actually psychologically you never then really switch off.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you kind of create those boundary, encourage people to put boundaries in place that from a psychological point of view, you learn to switch off and do stuff that helps you to relax?
Yeah. And thank you for that question. So it's really about setting up a workspace. Yes, it's nice to have extra monitors and things like that, but really what's best is just to have some sort of dedicated space. And even if you don't have room in your home for a separate office, do you have a corner somewhere that you can make look like an office so that you're in that mindset? Also, I intentionally wear collared shirts when I'm working. That's so how you dress can signal to you mentally, I'm going into this mode. I'm going into my work mode. I have my collared shirt. I'm ready to work. When it's time to play with kids, collared shirt comes off. It's time for the t-shirt. Let's go. Also, don't sit with your laptop on the couch. Don't don't take it to bed. Leave it in that workspace, wherever it is. Don't let the work follow you. So if you set regular times, if you set those boundaries in your space, and just like I talked about earlier, having those hours of overlap with your coworkers, you might also want to have that hours of overlap conversation with family members. So if you have others in your house, it's like, okay, I'm going to work from this time to this time. And after that, the light's off, you can walk in, you can interrupt me. And actually, my wife and I have this conversation almost daily where we kind of do a mini stand-up and she'll say, okay, what meetings do you have today? Because she's very much an extrovert. She needs to talk to somebody. She goes, okay, I have a meeting here, here, and here. She says, okay. And she'll come in and we'll chat about things that have happened during the day, and that works for her. So I was a little slow to pick up on that. She got a little testy with me one day, and I said, okay, I got it. I see what you're asking. My extrovert needs contact. So yeah, so really it's about setting those time and space boundaries. So you know when you're working, your family knows when you're working, and they know when you're not working. So make sure you schedule it. Exercise too, meditation too, schedule those times as well. Get them on your calendar. All right. Any others?
Stuart, you had your hand up.
Yeah, hi Mark. I guess almost a contextual type question. So almost one of the paradoxes that I found is that almost the more people you've got in an online meeting, the harder it is to get actual interaction. So if you've got a small group, generally people, especially if they know each other, they'll interact quite a lot. They'll sometimes have their cameras on. It's always a struggle, but there'll be quite a lot of interaction. So I guess it's kind of a scenario doing a 2-hour training session and there are 50 people in the training session. Any tips? I know obviously, in today's session, you use things like the polling and Menti. Those kind of things are quite good for getting engagement in the chat. Any other tips to kind of bring people out into the open and actually have an engaging session?
Yeah. So, so when you're not sure how many you have coming, which is the situation I had, and I've run meetups and I've been to many meetups, so I know you might have 50 people sign up and 20 show up. So on that kind of variability, you do what you can. So you get people to talk and chat, you get a Mentimeter. Had we not had so many, I probably would have been doing something more verbal. And if I had a better sense of how many we were coming, I probably would have done breakouts. So breakouts are your most effective tool. And I talk about this in the facilitation course I have on the screen right now. So if you can cover a small amount of content, go into breakouts, and that's where those who maybe are the introverts, those that need a little more processing time and time to think, they have that space in the breakout, and they can more easily share what their deeper thoughts are in the breakout, then come together in a plenary so that now all that information can be shared. And if you're familiar with liberating structures, there's also other ways to use breakouts that way. So the breakouts are sort of your super tool there, but also getting voices in the room as soon as possible. And that's where you also want to have breakouts. So a common thing I do, and you might want to try this in your next remote session, is let people know you're going to be there early. And when they start showing up, send them into breakouts of 3 to 4 and just say, this is just an opportunity for you to get to know each other, chat with each other, and talk about what you want to get out of this meeting. And so what that does is, if people are new, they get introduced. If they're not new, they start aligning on what is the purpose. So maybe they saw the purpose in the introduction or the email invitation. Hopefully that got sent out there, having that purpose and agenda ahead of time. But also having those little informal breakouts in the very beginning, what's called a soft start, allows people to start aligning. Oh yeah, I forgot about this thing that I wanted to bring up in the meeting. Thank you for this conversation. And then bringing everyone together and say, okay, here's the purpose, but what else do we need to consider? So now they've all had a chance to kind of think about it. Voices have gotten in the room, and now you can have like a short alignment session right there at the very beginning and say, okay, here's the main purpose, but what else might we need to consider? So, and you mentioned training. Sometimes I do this as part of a Kanban board as well. So I'll ask them to post their tough questions. And then what I'll do is I'll post those questions on the Kanban board where I think I'm going to address them. And so this helps set expectations. So if they have a burning question, they'll know, okay, he's going to get to it in this third topic. I can wait that long. Otherwise, they're going to keep interrupting. I've had that happen. So if you kind of set an expectation, this is what I'm going to answer that question for you. It can help. Yes. So Stuart says, breakouts. Unlucky for those of us who use Microsoft Teams. Yes, there are workarounds. Yes, they are messy. And we are all waiting for that breakout feature in Teams. Trust me, Stuart. I have run breakouts in Teams right now. Yeah, definitely not pretty, but it is doable. There's actually an alternative. I don't know if here in the neighborhood you've talked about KikoChat. Have you seen that one? So KikoChat is a tool that you can think of it as a Swiss Army knife. You can pull in Zoom, you can pull in Microsoft Teams, you can have very flexible breakout structures. Video facilitator is alternative, but your company might have concerns with that. But KikoChat is something that can work with Teams, so that might be something you want to look into. So, all right. Anything else?
That looks like that. No further questions or comments.
All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. It has been a pleasure. I'm going to my next workspace here, the TARDIS, and who knows where we'll see you again, but hopefully we will see you all well and healthy and able to move around freely.
Mark, sorry, there is actually one last question from Calvin in the chat, if you don't
okay.
mind answering it.
Yeah. What happens when we open a space for our family members to introduce themselves in our remote meetings and it becomes more of a problem? Well, it depends on the problem that you're talking about, Calvin. So when I've worked internally within organizations, I let team members know that when you work remotely, every day is bring your kid and pet and family member to work day. If you have that kind of mindset, that's okay. But you also have to set boundaries. You have to get work done. But I found that in most cases, team members are okay with the cat walking across the keyboard or seeing the dog or meeting the kids occasionally. If it's a constant disruption to the work of the team, then you need to talk about some boundaries there. So it kind of gets back to Clive's question about how do I set a dedicated space. That's part of that boundary that you need to set. And talking about hours of overlap with the family time is important too. And yes, I know if you have small kids, that's almost impossible. I get that.
I actually had an experience today, Mark. In training today, we started off by encouraging the group to, welcome their family members and pets and all of that. And some of the most engaged people in the class, the one was a lady who had her very young daughter on her lap the whole time.
Yep.
The other one was a father that had his two daughters in the background who were just intrigued by the drawings we were doing. So sitting there trying to mimic the drawings and pointing out. And it was absolutely fine. It was great. They were engaged. The kids were engaged. They would mute themselves if they needed to give an instruction, say something, and that's absolutely okay.
Yeah. But also keeping in mind that, right now childcare is challenging, school is challenging, so be patient. Just be patient. All right.
Thank you, Mark. That was superb. Yeah, you're such a great speaker, and we appreciate you sharing all your knowledge and wisdom. And I've got so many books now on my reading list on Amazon. yours is top, but I did see that you've said the first 3 people to sign up for your newsletter get a copy of your book. I hope I'm one of the 3. But please do sign up. But again, we really appreciate you joining, and everybody else, thank you so much for joining tonight. We've ended earlier, which is great, so you get to spend some time with your family. The session has been recorded. Once we have edited, we will put it back onto the Meetup group so you can access it. And you'll also see on Mark's last slide that we will have some of his trainings available through Think Agile, which is incredibly exciting. If you are interested, please do just pop us an email. I'm going to pop the email address here, info@thinkagile.co.za, and we will get in touch with you around the details. But thank you so much for joining, and have a lovely evening.